My days had become a relentless blur of exhaustion. It wasn't just a simple tiredness, it was a profound, bone-deep weariness that clung to me like a damp shroud, even if I'd gone to bed early, even if I thought I'd had a full 8 hours. I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't slept in days, as if my nights were spent running a marathon. Dragging myself out of bed for work felt like climbing a sheer, insurmountable mountain, a strange and persistent lethargy that was completely alien to my nature. I've always been a high-energy person, the kind who thrives on activity. A mere few hours of sleep and I was usually ready to conquer the world, brimming with vitality. Now the world felt like it was conquering me, slowly, inexorably, draining my very essence. I was utterly at a loss, desperate to understand what was happening to my body, to my mind. This wasn't just stress, this was something fundamentally wrong. After a barrage of medical tests, extensive blood work, terrifying sleep studies where I was hooked up to wires, neurological scans that probed my brain, even my bewildered doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me. He just looked at me with a sympathetic yet utterly perplexed expression, a silent admission of his own inability to explain my condition. Physically, you're perfect. Mentally, you seem fine. There's just nothing. It's inexplicable. The only recent significant change in my life was that my boyfriend, Julian, had moved in with me about 3 months prior. For the first time in my life, I was sharing a bed every single night. Julian was my first real love, the kind you read about in novels, my first serious, committed relationship. I cherished every moment with him, every shared glance, every touch. The thought of spoiling this new, exciting chapter, this perfect cohabitation, by making him sleep in the spare room felt almost blasphemous, an insult to our blossoming relationship. I genuinely loved having Julian around. He was attentive, almost doting, always making a fuss over me, anticipating my needs. And every night, without fail, he'd bring me a steaming mug of warm chamomile tea before bed, a thoughtful ritual that made me feel cherished, safe, loved. It was the perfect end to every day, a gentle descent into slumber. Then came the physical manifestations of my inexplicable fatigue, the undeniable proof that something was profoundly wrong. One morning, I jolted awake with a sharp, pulsating pain flaring in my right hip, a deep, bruising ache that radiated relentlessly up the entire side of my body. It was so intense that when I tried to stand, I cried out and nearly collapsed to the bathroom floor. Panic, cold and raw, flared in my chest. A large, dark bruise, a grotesque bloom of purple and black and angry red, covered my hip, stretching across my skin as if I had been violently assaulted in my sleep with a heavy metal bar. The sight of it, sickeningly vivid against my pale skin, sent a shiver of pure dread down my spine. This wasn't a clumsy fall. This was violence. "Julian, can you get in here?" I cried out, my voice thin and trembling, barely a whisper. He came rushing in, his eyes wide with what appeared to be feigned concern, a carefully constructed mask. "What's wrong, my love?" "I didn't fall out of bed or something?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath, my gaze fixed on the angry, throbbing bruise. I was searching his face for answers, for reassurance. Julian's face had a strange, almost imperceptible shift in expression, a momentary tightening around his eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. I could swear, in that fleeting, terrifying moment, that he looked guilty, a flicker of something unsettling, something hidden in his eyes. "Probably," he said dismissively, shrugging, his gaze avoiding mine, drifting towards the tiled floor. "I don't know. Happens, I guess."
His cold, detached response, the casual dismissal, sent my brain spiraling, a cascade of wild, terrifying thoughts. It didn't feel like a normal accident. It felt orchestrated. "This is not normal, Julian," I insisted, my voice rising, gaining a desperate edge. "This is not just a bump. I think there's something seriously wrong with me. Something more than just being tired." "You should probably see a doctor then," he said coldly, his voice flat, devoid of empathy, his eyes still avoiding mine, before quickly leaving the bathroom. He walked out, leaving me utterly alone with the throbbing pain, the monstrous bruise, and my escalating, suffocating dread.
My family doctor was still completely at a loss. After reviewing my new terrifying symptoms, the unexplained bruises, the deepening exhaustion, he suggested, with a hesitant, worried frown, that I see a specialist, someone who could truly probe the depths of this mystery, someone who could rule out anything nefarious, anything truly sinister, any foul play. Julian remained unnervingly dismissive during the drive to the hospital, his easygoing facade unnerving, almost grotesque in its perfection. "I'm sure it's nothing, sweetheart," he'd murmur, patting my hand. "You're probably just stressed from work. Your job is demanding, after all. These things happen." People don't wake up with bruises this severe from stress, I angrily thought to myself, the word screaming in my mind, a silent, furious retort. The doctor at the hospital, a stern, older woman with piercing blue eyes, listened intently to my story, her expression unreadable. She took more blood samples, tubes and vials filling rapidly, and performed all sorts of additional tests, including a detailed stress test that pushed my already exhausted body to its limits. I should have been relieved, even happy when the results came back clear, a perfect bill of health, but it only made me feel like I was truly losing my mind, spiraling into a terrifying abyss of self-doubt. Something was definitely wrong with me, something deeply, profoundly unsettling, and the medical world had no answers. "I would prescribe you sedatives," the doctor explained, her voice carefully neutral, yet tinged with a hint of confusion. "But your blood work shows you are already on nitrazepam." I was dumbstruck, my mind a complete blank, reeling from her words. I wasn't sure what the doctor was talking about, the name of the drug foreign and alien. "I have never taken so much as a painkiller in my life," I stammered, my voice incredulous, almost accusatory, disbelief warring with a burgeoning terror. The doctor's face mirrored my own shock, utterly stunned, a mask of professional disbelief. She pulled out her charts, scanning them again, double-checking the results with a meticulous precision. "No, you definitely tested positive for nitrazepam, which is a powerful sedative, a strong dose at that, enough to knock someone out cold." Later that evening, as I sat rigidly in bed, surrounded by the oppressive quiet of my room, a million different thoughts raced in my head, colliding, crashing, creating a dizzying, terrifying cacophony. How was that even possible? How could this drug be in my system? I was a careful person, meticulously aware of what went into my body. No medications, no illicit substances. The only new variable was Julian. The tea. The chamomile tea. A cold, insidious suspicion began to curdle in my stomach, turning to a burning certainty. Just then, as if summoned by my darkest thoughts, Julian walked in, his usual easy smile plastered on his face, holding my steaming mug of chamomile tea. He extended it toward me, the comforting aroma of herbs filling the air, a cruel parody of safety. And just as I was about to put it to my lips, a horrifying, unnerving thought struck me, a cold lightning bolt of realization, so sudden and brutal it took my breath away.
It hit me like a ton of bricks, a crushing weight of dread I had never felt before, not in my entire life, filling me with a terror so profound it stole the air from my lungs. My boyfriend was drugging me. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I took the cup, my fingers brushing his, feeling nothing but revulsion. I excused myself, mumbling something about needing to use the bathroom, my voice strained but hopefully convincing. Once inside, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum, I emptied the entire contents of the cup down the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl away, a poisonous secret. I splashed cold water on my face again and again, trying to clear the terrifying fog from my mind, to wash away the feeling of betrayal, then jumped back into bed, forcing a casual, relaxed air that felt utterly alien to my trembling body.
Was it hot enough for you? Julian asked, his voice smooth, innocent, as he settled into bed beside me, his arm instinctively reaching for me, pulling me closer. Perfect as always, I lied, my voice remarkably steady, considering the hurricane of terror raging inside me. My skin crawled at his touch. I felt as if I was lying beside a complete stranger, a dangerous predator disguised as the man I loved, his warmth a chilling deception. Had I ever really known him? Or was this dark secret something that had always lurked beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight? I lay there, rigid with fear, every muscle tense, terrified of what unimaginable things he might be doing to me while I slept, what horrors unfolded in the depths of my unconsciousness, what monstrous acts were committed upon my helpless form. I must have drifted off at some stage, succumbing to the residual effects of the nitrazepam I had ingested over days, perhaps even weeks, my body finally yielding to the invisible poison. When I woke up, the room was a complete, chaotic mess. My nightstand was overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the floor, its light bulb smashed, and furniture was askew, dragged across the room. Julian was nowhere to be seen, the space beside me cold and empty. My entire body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, a dull, pervasive throb that ran from my fingertips to my toes. It felt as if I had been in a brutal, violent fight, battered and bruised, though I couldn't remember a single blow. My skin felt raw, chafed in places, my joints stiff and burning. What the hell was he doing to me in my sleep? I thought, the desperate, terrifying question echoing in the silent, wrecked room. My resolve hardened, a cold, unyielding core. I had to go to the police, to expose this horror. But I knew, with a painful clarity, I needed evidence, undeniable proof. Otherwise it was just my word against his, a frantic, unbelievable tale. And who would believe such a fantastic, nightmarish story from someone who thought they were being drugged by their boyfriend? That same day, fueled by a cold, desperate resolve that burned away my fear, I purchased a hidden camera, a tiny, discreet device no bigger than my thumb that could record in low light and was motion activated. I meticulously set it up in the bedroom, concealed behind a stack of books on a dusty shelf, pointing directly towards the mattress, capturing every inch of the mattress. My heart pounded with a terrifying mix of dread and anticipation. My breath held tight in my chest. Tonight, I would know the truth. The next morning, I woke up utterly exhausted. As usual, the familiar weight on my limbs. This, horrifyingly, meant Julian had indeed done something to me while I slept, but this time I had it on camera. My hands trembled almost violently as I opened my laptop, navigating to the camera's footage, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. I braced myself. For the first couple of hours of sleep, nothing happened. My sleeping form lay still, peaceful,
For a fleeting moment, a desperate hope flickered within me. Maybe I was imagining everything. Maybe it was just a strange, terrifying sleep disorder, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. Then the footage began to play, and my blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. I watched myself jolt from the bed, a sudden, unnatural spasm that looked like a puppet on strings. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, what I was doing. It felt like I was watching a horror movie, a grotesque, impossible nightmare unfolding before my very eyes. A chilling spectacle as I watched my own body begin to crawl up the bedroom wall, slowly, deliberately, like some possessed demon, my limbs bending at unnatural angles, defying every law of gravity. I continued to crawl inch by agonizing inch onto the ceiling, my body suspended effortlessly above the bed, my head hanging down, looking down over Julian like I was a predatory arachnid, a monstrous spider, ready to pounce on him.
Julian woke, and what was truly bizarre was his reaction. There was no shock, no fear, not even surprise. It was like he was completely prepared for what was happening, his face calm, almost bored. He seemed utterly unfazed. He simply reached under the bed, pulling out a long, sturdy wooden stick, almost like a broom handle, but heavier, denser. As my body, pounced from the ceiling above, falling with an unnerving, predatory grace, he met my attack. I watched, horrified and detached, as he spent the next hour fighting me off, parrying my wild, inhuman lunges, dodging my strikes with practiced ease, his movements fluid and efficient. He was defending himself from me. I watched him subdue me on the bed, my own body twisting and thrashing against his controlled strength, a terrifying struggle against myself, before he pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs and methodically, efficiently cuffed me to the headboard, securing me in place. The footage ended there, the screen going black. I looked at the dark, raw marks on my wrists now, the painful chafing that had appeared on my skin morning after morning. They made terrifying, agonizing sense. The exhaustion, the inexplicable bruises, the pervasive pain. It was all real. It wasn't a nightmare. It was my life. As soon as Julian came home from work, his footsteps echoing through the silent house, I ran to him, throwing my arms around his neck, forcing a desperate, almost hysterical embrace. I had to know. The questions burned in my mind. "Why didn't you tell me what you were going through every night?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears, my body trembling against his. Julian shrugged his shoulders, a casual, dismissive gesture that sent fresh shivers down my spine. His eyes held that familiar, unsettling blankness, a terrifying void of emotion. "I thought you knew, sweetheart," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, devoid of empathy, almost amused. "And usually the drugs I was giving you made things a little easier, made it so you wouldn't remember the fights, made you more docile, easier to handle." My stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot. "Why are you even still with me?" I managed to ask, the words barely audible, a desperate plea for understanding. He chuckled, a low, unnerving sound that vibrated through my chest. "My last girlfriend was a jealous psychopath," he said, his smile chilling, utterly devoid of warmth. "You're a walk in the park compared to her, much more manageable." His smile widened, and then he added, his voice dropping, his eyes fixing on mine with an unsettling intensity, a predatory gleam.
Besides, I've grown quite fond of our little nighttime adventures, and I enjoy having a challenge. His grip tightened on my arm, not painfully, but with a possessiveness that felt like a trap closing in, a cage snapping shut around me. You're a lot stronger than you look, you know, and faster. It's quite thrilling to see you like that, the way you move. And in that horrifying moment, as his words hung in the air, a chilling realization crashed over me. I wasn't just his girlfriend. I was his nightly entertainment, his twisted plaything, his prey. And I was trapped in my own home, a prisoner in my own body, in a nightmare that was set to unfold every single night. The echoes of my own monstrous actions, fueled by his poison, would forever haunt my waking hours.
The rain lashed against the attic window, a relentless drumming that mirrored the anxiety building within me, a subtle hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It had been weeks, perhaps even months, since the last of those ill-fated dates. Each encounter with Hunter had left behind a strange, almost tangible residue of unease that clung to me like a damp shroud. Even his name, when it drifted unbidden into my thoughts, felt less like a label and more like a shadow, always there, lurking at the very edge of my perception, just out of sight. Our interactions viewed in retrospect had been subtly off-kilter from the beginning, like a film reel playing just a fraction of a second out of sync, creating a disquieting distortion of reality. A compliment that lingered too long, his eyes holding an unnerving intensity that made my skin crawl. Small, almost imperceptible red flags that I, in my naive hope for connection, had consciously chosen to ignore. The final evening we spent together, if one could even call it that, ended abruptly at the curb under the harsh glare of a street lamp. His insistence on seeing me home, his casual dismissal of my polite refusal, felt less like genuine concern and more like an unspoken, undeniable claim on my time, my presence. I'd invented an urgent early start the next day of flimsy, transparent shield against his persistent, almost aggressive invitation to come over. As my tires finally gripped the wet asphalt, pulling away from the dimly lit street, a familiar car materialized in my rearview mirror, its headlights cutting through the downpour like predatory eyes. It wasn't just similar. The specific, almost imperceptible dent above the passenger side wheel well, a detail I'd noticed during our awkward goodbyes, confirmed my growing, sickening dread. It was Hunter. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my chest, tapped out a terse text message. "Are you following me?" His reply was instantaneous, almost unsettlingly so, appearing on my screen before I had even registered the question fully. "Just want to make sure you're safe." The words themselves offered a thin veneer of care, a plausible excuse, but the underlying possessiveness, the undeniable sense of intrusion was palpable, burning through the false politeness. I tried calling him, my phone pressed tightly against my ear, each unanswered ring amplifying the chilling sensation of being watched, of being hunted. The line went dead. I pulled my car over beneath the flickering, sickly amber glow of a distant streetlight. the silence inside the vehicle, momentarily broken only by the insistent, drumming rhythm of the rain against the roof. My breath hitched in my throat. Another text, more direct, a desperate plea masquerading as a command. "Stop! I'm fine." The car behind me hesitated, its headlights cutting through the swirling sheets of rain for a pregnant moment, illuminating nothing but the emptiness of the road ahead, before finally, agonizingly slowly, receding into the oppressive darkness of the night. Relief, a thin, fragile thread, was short-lived, immediately replaced by a prickling sensation of intense vulnerability, a feeling of being utterly exposed in the suffocating solitude of my car. Hours later, long after I had convinced myself that he was truly gone, a new message arrived as I lay in bed. The screen's harsh glow illuminated the tight knot of fear that had taken root in my stomach. "Hope I didn't weird you out. Sorry about the drinks. Next time, my place, more relaxed." His subsequent messages escalated quickly, morphing from faux apology to thinly veiled accusations when I politely but firmly declined any further contact. The digital space, once a realm of easy connection, now felt tainted, contaminated by his persistent, unwanted presence, each notification a new tendril of dread wrapping around me. Then the voiceless calls came, a phantom ringing from blocked numbers that punctuated the sudden, terrifying silences of my apartment. Each unanswered ring a subtle, chilling act of violation. The flowers appeared on my doorstep a few days later, a vibrant, almost mocking bouquet of roses against the muted, decaying tones of the autumn morning. The card, with its saccharine apology and desperate plea for a second chance, felt like a tangible manifestation of his insidious intrusion. He knew where I lived. The realization sent a cold, undeniable shiver down my spine, the supposed romantic gesture twisting into something deeply, profoundly menacing. It wasn't charming. It was a threat.
I sent a final, forceful message, my fingers shaking as I typed, demanding he cease all contact, that he never approach my home again, warning of a restraining order. The block offered a fragile digital barrier, but the pervasive sense of unease, of being watched, of being subject to his constant, unseen scrutiny, persisted, a suffocating weight on my chest. Sleep became a fractured, shallow state, punctuated by phantom sounds in the dead of night and the persistent, chilling feeling of being observed, even when I knew, logically, I was alone. One night, a sound, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, jolted me awake from a fitful sleep. Not a crash or a bang, but a soft, deliberate creak from downstairs, a whisper of movement in the suffocating silence of the old house. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of peace, now felt porous, vulnerable, its walls offering no real protection. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic, erratic thumping of my own heart, a drum solo of pure panic in my ears. A floorboard groaned, a faint, almost musical sigh from the lower level. Then a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the wooden floor, the whisper of fabric against wood, sending an icy wave through my veins. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I slipped from my bed, my bare feet landing with a soft thud on the cold wood floor, a shock of icy reality. Huddling behind my heavy dresser, a flimsy fortress against an unseen enemy, I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with a fear so profound it bordered on nausea. A text to my neighbor, a desperate, silent plea for awareness, for help. Anything seems strange outside? Call if you hear anything. No response. The clock on my nightstand glowed a malevolent red. 3:17 a.m. Then, the distinct, deliberate sound of my front door slowly, agonizingly opening. Each soft click of the latch, each barely audible groan of the hinges echoed in the suffocating silence of the house, amplified tenfold by my terror. Footsteps, light but deliberate, began to ascend the carpeted stairs, each soft tread a hammer blow against my chest. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. It couldn't be. He wouldn't dare. He couldn't possibly be inside. The footsteps reached the landing, pausing just outside my bedroom door. The air crackled with unspoken menace, thick and suffocating. A long, drawn-out pause. The doorknob, just inches from my trembling hand, began to turn, slowly, inexorably, with a soft, metallic scrape. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable intrusion, the horrifying violation of the last, most sacred vestige of my safety. The door creaked inward, revealing only a deeper, darker void. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was no longer alone. The absolute, profound silence that followed, a void where sound should have been, was infinitely more terrifying than any scream. I could feel his presence in the room, a cold, oppressive weight, even if I couldn't see him. Every nerve ending screamed, awaiting the next move.
Halloween week at school was, without a doubt, the absolute best time of the year. My friends and I would stay late, long after the last bell, in the hushed, echoing halls of the old school building, helping Mrs. Davison, our arts teacher, transform the gymnasium into a haunted house for the annual carnival. The air would fill with the scent of construction paper, fake cobwebs, and the delicious promise of free pizza, our reward for hours spent meticulously crafting cardboard tombstones and dangling plastic spiders. Chris, a quiet kid from another class, was always there too. He seemed nice, always had a shy smile, and we'd sometimes joke around while stapling streamers. He genuinely seemed like a funny, even cool kid, and he never, not once, gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. Then, a few weeks later, the whisper started. A group of older girls, the ones who seemed to know everything before anyone else, approached me in the hallway, their faces alight with mischievous excitement, wide grins plastered across their faces. "Maya," they chimed in unison, their voices conspiratorial. "You have a secret admirer. He's going to text you tonight." I won't lie. A thrill, a flutter of nervous curiosity danced in my stomach. Who could it be? The idea felt like something out of a movie, innocent and exciting. That night, just as the moon began to peek through my bedroom window, casting long, eerie shadows across my rug, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Messenger. This was the only app my parents let me use to communicate with them when they were out, a sort of digital leash. The message was from Chris. I'd completely, inexplicably forgotten that I had even accepted his friend request on Facebook during the chaos of Halloween. My heart gave a little skip. I opened the message. "Maya, I need to talk to you. It's really important." A small knot of concern formed in my stomach. I quickly typed back, "What is it? Is everything okay?" The typing bubbles appeared, a trio of silent, pulsing dots, and they stayed there, hovering ominously for what felt like an eternity. A good 2 minutes. The silence in my room deepened, punctuated only by the distant chirping of crickets outside. Finally, his message materialized, a long, rambling paragraph that stretched across my screen. I wasn't prepared for what came next. In a long, rambling confession, he declared his love for me, how I had been driving him crazy since Halloween. Then he detailed how he had tried to impress me during recess, showcasing his soccer skills, but how I had never seemed to notice him. He said he was growing tired of being ignored. The message ended with a chilling, almost desperate plea. I want you to notice me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend? I cringed, physically recoiling from the screen. What the hell? I whispered into the quiet of my room. I barely knew this kid anymore. We had drifted apart years ago, our paths diverging after kindergarten. I stared at the message, the words swimming before my eyes. I desperately tried to come up with a way to let him down easily, a soft landing, as I genuinely didn't want to hurt his feelings, even if his words had sent a cold shiver down my spine. I told him I didn't like him like that, and that I just wanted to be friends. I could tell right away that he didn't like this answer. He kept asking why, his messages coming in quick succession, each one more insistent. I had to come up with a new reason each time, a flimsy excuse to shield myself from his relentless pursuit, until he eventually stopped answering. The next morning was a nightmare, a descent into a waking terror. Some of his friends, boys I barely knew, kept coming up to me, their faces twisted into taunting grins. "Chris wants to kiss you," they crow, their words echoing through the crowded hallways. He had apparently told the entire grade that he intended to kiss me, and that he would do it even if it meant cornering me. Taking this as the blatant threat it was, I decided, heart pounding, to tell my teacher. Mrs. Jenkins, bless her heart, listened patiently. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, to never leave the classroom alone, and that if he ever got even close to me, I was to run straight back to her. But this wasn't enough. It didn't feel safe.
I reported him to the principal, Mr. Harrison, a stern but seemingly kind man. He listened with a grave expression, promising to do something right away. This gave me a sliver of relief, a fragile hope that the torment would cease. I feel I should mention that I lived right across the street from my school, a small, quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and everyone, including Chris, knew exactly where I lived. This knowledge, once benign, now felt like a predatory gaze fixed on my home, leading to what happened next. Later on in the week, the crisp autumn air turning colder, I was walking home from school, the backpack heavy on my shoulders. I hadn't even been inside my house for more than 2 minutes, the scent of my mom's cooking barely reaching my nose, when I heard a distinct, insistent knocking on my front door. My heart jumped. I crept to the living room window, peeking through a small gap in the curtains, just in time to see a fleeting glimpse of someone quickly ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have been following me, his shadow, a silent, unseen companion. My mom, hearing the persistent knocking, opened the door cautiously. No one was there, only a folded piece of paper lying on the welcome mat, addressed simply to Maya. I read the note out loud, my voice trembling slightly. It said there was a surprise waiting for me under the Cadillac in our driveway, which at the time belonged to my older brother. My mom, a worried frown on her face, went to check, only to find nothing. But it was after this day, a chilling coincidence or something far more sinister, that my brother's beloved Cadillac, a classic car he adored, inexplicably stopped working. I still have no idea what Chris did to that car, what silent act of sabotage he committed, but my brother was forced to sell it, a piece of his pride gone. Unfortunately, my nightmare didn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, their voices like buzzing flies in my ears, telling me to give him a chance and that he would treat me right. There was even a moment when I caught Chris taking a picture of me walking home, his phone held subtly, almost hidden behind his back. The only reason I saw him was because I barely heard the faint, telltale click of an iPhone camera behind me, a sound that now sends shivers down my spine. Who knows how many photos of me he had on his phone, how many unseen moments of my life he had captured, turning me into some twisted object of his obsession. And every single morning, without fail, I woke up to a new message from him. Something along the lines of, "I can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." Each one a fresh assault on my peace of mind. The harassment and stalking were only getting worse, a tightening noose around my sense of safety, making me fear for my very well-being, especially now that he knew exactly where I lived, a secret world suddenly exposed. Finally, a call came into the counselor's office, a summons that felt like a lifeline. I felt a surge of genuine relief, expecting her to tell me that Chris was going to get in serious trouble, that the police would finally get involved, anything to make it stop. Instead, what I heard was worse, far worse than anything I could have imagined. The counselor, a woman with a perpetually kind smile that now seemed grotesque, proceeded to tell me with a placid, almost dismissive tone that boys will be boys, that they do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about this. She told me I should feel flattered, as this kind of stuff was bound to happen, and that the only thing I could do was to accept it and learn from it. At the time, in my 6th grade innocence, I didn't see the problem with her words, as I genuinely believed her, desperately wanting the nightmare to end. But looking back on it now, with the cold, clear light of adulthood, this was an insane, disturbing, and frankly dangerous thing to say to a 6th grader who was being sexually harassed and who was fearing for her safety almost every single day.
That afternoon, I came home from school, my young mind reeling, telling my mom everything the counselor had told me. Her face, usually so warm and comforting, tightened with a righteous fury. I was called to the principal's office again that same week, this time with my mom present, her presence a protective shield. I remember very clearly my mom's voice, sharp and cutting, as she confronted the counselor and principal. "What are you waiting for? For something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She continued to ask why it was taking so long for something to be done, for any real action to be taken. Both the counselor and the principal remained silent, their faces unreadable, their silence deafening. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor, her voice low and menacing, telling her to never speak to me again unless she, my mother, was present. But, unfortunately, despite my mom's fierce intervention, I don't think the school ever truly punished Chris. To this day, the thought of it enrages me. He basically got away with everything, his actions unpunished, his twisted obsession left unchecked, and it doesn't even end there. One night during the weekend, when my parents had gone out shopping and the house was swallowed by an oppressive silence, I was about to finally drift off to sleep after watching a YouTube video on my iPad, when I heard something. A faint, almost imperceptible tap against my window. Now, I'm on the 2nd floor of our house, so this was especially strange, unnerving. The only things that ever hit my window are birds accidentally flying into it, a soft, harmless thud. I sat up, my heart beginning a slow, nervous rhythm, listening intently to the silence. Then it happened again. A clearer thud, as if someone had thrown something small and hard at the glass. Then it happened again and again. They were consistent, rhythmic thuds, a deliberate message, and it was starting to freak me out. Finally, fueled by a mixture of terror and a desperate need to know, I got the courage to get up from my bed and peek through the curtain. My heart dropped into my stomach with a sickening thud when I opened the curtain and looked down into the darkness. There he was, Chris, standing on the lawn below, holding a handful of small rocks, looking directly up at my window. He somehow, chillingly, had managed to figure out exactly which window was mine, a secret invasion of my private space. He was about to throw another rock when he noticed me, my silhouette framed in the window. I could ever so slightly see his lips moving, his mouth forming words, but I didn't stop to see what he was saying. I remember backing away from the window, my breath catching in my throat, and then running, my bare feet pounding against the floor to check if every single window and door in the house was locked. Thankfully, everything was secured. When I returned to my room, my hands shaking, my phone screen lit up with 4 new messages from Chris appearing in rapid succession, a final desperate burst of his twisted affection. "Why did you leave? I just want to talk. I'm sorry. All I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me. You are not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that, my finger hovering over the button as if sealing off a dangerous portal. Thankfully, I never had another incident after that night, although I had to endure seeing him throughout the entirety of my school years, from 6th grade to senior year, his presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the terror he had inflicted. The last thing I heard about him was a fleeting rumor. He was arrested. God only knows for what. But the saddest and scariest part of my story, a truth that still haunts me, is the fact that a school counselor, a supposed figure of guidance and protection, was comfortable with telling me that this kind of predatory behavior was a compliment and a learning experience for me as a girl. I just hope that woman no longer works with children and that I never, ever have to see Chris again.
My life, for the most part, has been characterized by a profound, almost innate degree of isolation. Even in childhood, social interactions felt cumbersome. I was always the quiet one, the one watching from the periphery. This isn't a lament, merely an observation. Romantic relationships, understandably, presented a more significant challenge. My late entry into sexual experience at 21 is perhaps indicative of my social trajectory. By 23, I had achieved a certain degree of independence, having successfully moved out of my parents' place. I had been diligently working a high-paying job, accumulating enough to purchase a townhouse in my hometown. It was surprisingly affordable, yet spacious, the kind of place that could genuinely impress for a 23-year-old owner. So, one day I found myself swiping through profiles on Tinder. I matched with a rather decent-looking girl whom I shall refer to as Emily. Our initial date was conventional. Dinner at a local establishment, polite conversation. I was, predictably, self-conscious, but to my profound astonishment, she expressed genuine interest. The relationship progressed swiftly. We became intimate, exclusive. Initially, the constant communication felt validating. The stream of texts, the inquiries about my whereabouts, it fulfilled a certain need, a counterpoint to my inherent solitude. However, the frequency and intensity gradually shifted, morphing into attentiveness, into something more akin to surveillance. The demand to share our real-time locations felt like an invasive breach of privacy, an erosion of the boundaries I had carefully constructed.
Her inquiries about my time spent with friends became increasingly accusatory. An unexpected appearance at Phil's house, a public reprimand for a perceived lack of responsiveness, marked a turning point. The possessiveness was no longer subtle, it was a palpable force. I decided in that moment that I had to end it. The decision to end the relationship, conveyed via text, was born out of a growing unease, a primal fear of her escalating behavior. The subsequent barrage of calls and messages, the pounding on my door, the neighbor's bewildered intervention, these events confirmed the validity of my apprehension. Blocking her digital presence offered a temporary reprieve, but the sense of being watched, of being subject to her scrutiny, persisted. A week later, a sense of normalcy began to return. An evening spent with friends, a late return to my townhouse. The quiet of my home, usually a comfort, felt different that night, charged with an almost imperceptible tension. A microwave hummed, its shrill sound breaking the silence, and then I suddenly heard it, a distinct click or soft thud from the dining room. My townhouse looped around in a circle, and the den and dining room were connected by a closed door. I am meticulous about keeping doors shut. The click was followed by the almost imperceptible sound of the dining room door easing open, a soft, deliberate sound that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. I peered into the dining room. "Who's in here?" I called out, my voice a strained whisper. No response. Armed with the biggest, heaviest knife from the kitchen block, I called 911 immediately. I had never called 911 in my life. This was a horrifying first. I spoke loudly, deliberately, hoping whoever was in there would hear me. "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend has broken into my house. Please send someone." The dispatcher instructed me to wait outside. So I went outside, my eyes darting nervously around the shadows. Surprisingly quickly, a police car arrived. I briefly explained what I thought was going on and led the officer into my home. We performed a thorough search. Every closet, under every bed, even the tiny attic. To my utter bewilderment, no one was in there. The officer, though polite, offered a skeptical reassurance, telling me to call again if I heard anything. This, at least, told me he believed me.
My night was, quite obviously, disturbed beyond repair. I ate my food, its warmth long dissipated, and then went to my room, locking the door behind me. I texted all my friends and family about how spooked I was, but given that no one had been found inside, I had no choice but to dismiss it, to rationalize it as just one of those creepy moments, a house settling. I took a double dose of melatonin and quickly drifted off into a restless, anxious sleep. Surprisingly, however, I am a very light sleeper, and some subtle disturbance caused me to wake up abruptly. I checked my phone and saw a multitude of texts from a random, unrecognized number. It was Emily. She was stating how sorry she was, that she desperately wanted to talk, begging me to see her. Then, amidst the frantic messages, a chilling anomaly. The repetition of, "Are you awake?" and "Wake up," repeated over and over again. She had said "wake up" a total of 8 times. I responded, my fingers flying across the keypad. "Why are you awake right now? This is crazy that you're blowing me up at an hour like this. Honestly, if I wasn't sure before, these past few days alone have confirmed that I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Please, just leave me alone." Seconds after I pressed send, a sound, a blood-curdling, unearthly scream erupted from inside the closet right next to my bed. It was Emily's voice, unmistakable, yelling the single devastating word, "No!" And then, with a splintering crash, the closet door burst open, revealing her standing there in the dim light, a shadow come to life. The glint of metal in her hand confirmed the nightmarish reality. I didn't have time to think. I jumped out of bed and got that bedroom door open, trying to escape. Once out of the room, I slammed the door shut, my shoulder bracing against it, holding it closed with all my might as she tried, with desperate, frantic force, to open it from the inside. She didn't just try opening it, though. She started stabbing the door, a furious, rhythmic thudding that sent splinters flying. And then, through the thin wood, I saw it. The knife's blade piercing through the door, disturbingly close to where my side was pressed. In that harrowing moment, a desperate, illogical thought flashed through my mind. I screamed with all the power in my lungs, "Baby, I love you! Stop!"
When I screamed that I loved her, the frantic stabbing stopped. A sudden, unsettling calm descended from inside the room. She quieted. I took this brief, terrifying moment of stillness to call 911 again, silently this time, my phone still clutched in my trembling hand. Through the door, I made up an elaborate lie, telling her I loved her and was planning on getting back with her, just to buy time. She said, her voice frantic, "That's all I wanted to hear. Why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She asked me to open the door. I stalled, telling her I was scared and wanted her to drop the knife. Eventually, she agreed. I told her to throw it across the room so I could clearly hear it land. I heard the unmistakable clang of the knife ricocheting off the wall. Then I yanked the door open and without a second's hesitation tackled Emily to the floor. She screamed, a raw, primal sound, and fought with a terrifying strength, going utterly hysterical, thrashing beneath me. I didn't care. I held her down, my weight pinning her, as I yelled my address and everything that was happening into the phone. I held her down, my muscles screaming, all the way until the police arrived. To my absolute astonishment, the police literally kicked the front door down, the sound so loud it could be heard over Emily's struggles. Officers flooded the room quickly. Emily was put in cuffs swiftly, her desperate, heartbroken sobs echoing through the room. I think the only reason I wasn't crying was because I was in such a profound state of shock. This was, without a doubt, the worst, most scarring night of my entire life. The nightmare didn't end there, though. There was a long, arduous, and profoundly serious legal process that followed, aimed at getting Emily convicted. I never wanted my name or any personal information to be leaked out there on the internet to end up as fodder on one of those true crime YouTube channels. So, I've been meticulously careful about not leaking too much information. Emily, as far as I know, is imprisoned for some very serious charges. No part of that, I must clarify, makes me happy. This was someone I spent a significant, intense chunk of my life with. Someone I thought, for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I loved. Someone who tried to kill me. She was not, demonstrably, right in the head. And it still pains me how oblivious I was to the escalating signs of her instability, not just because of how utterly infatuated I became at first, but also, to a significant degree, because of my own profound lack of self-confidence. I was so singularly focused on impressing her that I completely failed to pay attention to certain glaringly alarming behaviors on her part. I know this experience, this profound violation, will stick with me forever, an indelible scar on my psyche. And honestly, even if only anonymously, it would feel profoundly good to finally get this story out there, to share this terrifying truth if it's chosen to be read.
It was late 2020. The world outside still felt like a fragile, broken thing,
humming with an undercurrent of collective anxiety. My retail job had vanished like smoke, leaving me scrambling for any income. Uber seemed like the only lifeline. Working nights, you see things, hear things, not just the usual drunken confessions or awkward silences, but the whispers of the city's hidden pulse. Nothing, however, prepared me for that Friday in October. The air was already biting, hinting at the deep chill of winter. It was just past midnight. I dropped off a high roller at a minimalist concrete hotel on the city's edge, a place that felt more like a fortress than a sanctuary. The streetlights here were sparse, swallowed by the encroaching darkness of the unkempt outskirts. My phone chimed with a new request almost immediately. The pickup was about 6 minutes away, at an old, abandoned-looking bowling alley attached to a forgotten strip mall, the kind of place you'd expect to see tumbleweeds rolling through. The name on the app was Derek. I accepted, a strange prickle of unease already starting to form. When I pulled up, the silence was oppressive. It wasn't just quiet, it was a void of sound, broken only by the low hum of my engine. A few sickly yellow lights flickered in the vast, empty parking lot, barely piercing the gloom. No other cars, no distant chatter, just the skeletal outline of the bowling alley, its marquee dark, its windows like vacant eyes. And then I saw him. A lone figure, bathed in the sickly glow of one of those dying lights. Tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a plain gray hoodie pulled low and dark jeans. His hands were stuffed deep in his pockets, and his head was bowed as if studying the scuff marks on his shoes. I eased my car to a stop, the brake lights a fleeting crimson against the black. He looked up slowly, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. No wave, no acknowledgement, just a slow, deliberate turn of his head. I rolled down the window, the night air carrying a faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something metallic. "Derek?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, then walked to the back door on the passenger side and slid in behind me. The silence in the car became a physical presence. I started the trip, the GPS voice a strangely comforting monotone, and asked if the destination was correct, an address 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never heard of. "Yeah, that's right," he said, his voice a low, even murmur, completely devoid of inflection. It was flat, like a dead battery. Not drunk, not high, just flat. I remember the fleeting thought that it was unnerving, but the late hour and the need for income pushed it aside. Just another strange passenger. For the first 5 or 6 minutes, the silence in the car was absolute. No fidgeting, no phone screens, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the low thrum of my own heartbeat. Every now and then, I'd glance at him in the rearview mirror, and every single time, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window, not at his phone, but directly at the back of my head. His eyes, even shadowed by the hood, felt like 2 dark, heavy weights pressing against my skull. It wasn't a casual gaze, it was unnervingly fixed. I tried to break the growing tension. "How's your night going?" I asked, forcing a casualness I didn't feel.
He paused. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before he finally spoke. Just needed to get out. His voice remained unnervingly calm. "Out of where?" I pressed, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Doesn't matter." The conversation died, replaced by the relentless, palpable pressure of his silent observation. My neck began to prickle.
We drove on, deeper into the night. About 15 minutes in, the destination loomed closer. The GPS directed me off the main roads into an isolated part of town. No streetlights here, just sprawling, unkempt yards, overgrown with shadows and ancient trees whose branches clawed at the moonless sky. The houses were few and far between, ghostly outlines against the darkness. This wasn't a neighborhood. It felt like the edge of the world. As we approached the exact address, he suddenly leaned forward, his reflection in the mirror appearing unnervingly close, and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. My headlights cut through the gloom, revealing a decaying structure. It was utterly dark, no lights anywhere, inside or out. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten tomb. The lawn was a tangled mess of weeds, the paint on the siding peeling in grotesque strips, like skin flaking from a corpse. There was no car in the driveway, no sign of life. "Is this your place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. "Just pull in," he repeated, his voice flat, insistent. I hesitated, my gut screaming at me to floor it and get out. But the car was already turning. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the tires crunching loudly in the dead silence. I stopped near the dilapidated porch and put the car in park. He didn't move. I looked back at him, my heart thudding. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice tight. His gaze was fixed on the dark front door, as if waiting for a specter to appear. "Wait here." And then he opened the door, a soft click that echoed too loudly, and got out. He didn't go to the front door. Instead, he walked around the side of the house, his silhouette swallowed by the deeper shadows, disappearing from my sight. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity, probably only 2 agonizing minutes. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of leaves a potential approach. The ride was still technically running on the app, a flimsy excuse. I didn't want a penalty, but a far more primal fear was gripping me. My gut, a cold, clenching fist, told me this wasn't just a quick stop. This was something deeply, profoundly wrong. Finally, the urge to flee became unbearable. I manually ended the trip, marking it as complete. My hand trembled as I reached for the gear shift. But before I could even shift into reverse, I saw him. He was walking back towards the car, not running, but moving with an unnerving speed, a glide that was almost predatory. His hands were empty, and his face, now caught in the faint glow of my dashboard, held an expression that made my blood run cold, a terrifying blend of cold rage and twisted amusement. My fingers, almost instinctively, unlocked the doors. I didn't want a confrontation, but every fiber of my being screamed not to let him back in.
He opened the rear door, slid in, and his voice, still flat but with an edge of chilling demand, said, "Take me to the other place." "What other place?" My voice was hoarse. "Just drive. I'll tell you." "You need to put it in the app," I insisted, trying to sound professional, but my hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes black holes absorbing all light. "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. No response. After a few seconds, he simply told me to drive back to where he picked me up, the bowling alley. I didn't want to argue anymore. My throat was dry, my mind racing, so I started heading back. The entire drive back was an exercise in terror. The pressure in the car was suffocating. He wasn't speaking, but I could feel his gaze, a constant weight on the back of my head. The hairs on my arms stood on end, prickling with dread. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood, a desperate attempt to break the spell. "Rough night?" I ventured, my voice thin. "You could say that,"
he replied, a hint of something dark in his flat tone. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. I didn't ask any more questions. The air vibrated with unspoken threat. When we finally got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same dim light where I'd picked him up, the same desolate quiet. But before I could say anything, he leaned forward, his face eerily close to mine in the rearview mirror, and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I let out a choked, awkward laugh. "Not really something I think about," I mumbled. He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, his gaze unwavering. After a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out, without another word. He didn't close the door immediately. He just stood there, half out of the car, a chilling tableau against the dark. Then he looked at me, his eyes now seeming to glitter in the faint light, and said, his voice a low, chilling whisper, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door with a soft click that resonated through my bones and walked off, disappearing into the utter blackness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, maybe more, too shaken to move, the phantom weight of his gaze still on me. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors, every shadow a potential return. Once home, I was a wreck. I opened the Uber app, my hands shaking, to review the trip details. And that's when the real horror began. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was as if the ride never happened, as if he never existed. I contacted Uber support, desperate for an explanation, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. Sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know that man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I've never seen him again, and I pray I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a passenger who sits in unnerving silence in the back seat, I remember that night, and I remember that cold, creeping feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or perhaps he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car.
It was 2021, and I was driving for Uber full-time. My city, a bustling summer destination, teemed with tourists, making rideshare gigs a decent way to stay afloat. I preferred the night shifts, the traffic was lighter, and the tips from a cheerful, if somewhat inebriated crowd returning from the bars were usually better. This particular Saturday night, around 1:30 a.m., was no exception. I just dropped off a particularly boisterous group of college kids, their drunken chants still echoing in my ears, so I welcomed the notification for a seemingly quieter request. The name displayed was Chris. The pickup location, a small side street just off the vibrant downtown core. But as I navigated the familiar streets, the GPS led me to an odd spot, not near any of the usual bars or apartment complexes, but rather near the desolate backlot of an old, crumbling strip mall, the kind of place where streetlights were broken and shadows clung heavily to every corner. A bad GPS marker, I told myself, a common glitch. I pulled up, my headlights cutting through the inky blackness, to find a lone figure standing at the corner. Hood up, jeans on, staring down at his phone, almost camouflaged against the dark. I eased to a stop and called out, "Chris?" He gave a curt nod and slid into the back seat without a word. No smell of alcohol, no slurred speech. He seemed sober, just unnervingly quiet. He didn't greet me, nor did he respond when I attempted a polite, "How's your night going?" Some people just aren't talkers, I reasoned, trying to dismiss the prickle of unease that had already started. I initiated the ride. The drop-off was on the opposite side of town, a 25-minute drive to a suburban neighborhood I'd visited only once or twice before.
The thing is, it was pitch black out there, like truly isolated, with long stretches of road where no streetlights dared to venture and houses swallowed by overgrown trees. About 5 minutes into the trip, I noticed Chris had his phone out. But he wasn't texting or scrolling, he was holding it flat in his lap, the flashlight on, shining a low, steady beam upward slightly, toward my seat. The faint glow danced in my rearview mirror, a disturbing, constant presence. It wasn't aimed at anything specific, just broadly pointed at the back of my head. I tried to make light of it, half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He simply mumbled, "Yeah." And then, with a click, the flashlight went dark. The next 20 minutes were utterly silent. Just the low hum of the engine, the whisper of the tires on the lonely road, and a palpable, unsettling tension building in the car. I can't quite describe it. Something about this guy just felt off. Not overtly threatening, but deeply unsettling. It was as if he wasn't fully present, his essence diffused, leaving only a shell behind. We finally reached the neighborhood. I followed the GPS to the house, but as we pulled up, I noticed it was completely dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. It was swallowed by the night, a gaping maw of blackness. "Is this the right place?" I asked, my voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet. Chris didn't answer. He just sat there, a still, silent figure. I turned around to look at him, a shiver running down my spine. "Hey, is this it?" I repeated, a little louder, my voice laced with a newfound urgency. He stared past me, out the window, at the impenetrable darkness of the house. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he gave a slow, deliberate nod. So I put the car in park, and trying to sound normal, said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there, a still, silent figure. "Are you good?" I asked again, my patience wearing thin, the unease tightening its grip. He finally reached for the door handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there, waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, then a full minute. The cold night air seeped into the car through the open door. I was just about to say something, to demand he close the door, when he suddenly turned around, his face illuminated by the distant streetlights, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." My heart jumped. I blinked. "Back where?" I asked. "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat, utterly devoid of emotion, yet there was an underlying desperation that was unnerving. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me, his eyes wide and dark. He began to beg, his voice still flat, but with a strange guttural urgency. "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine, a whisper that seemed to come from another world. "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily, a ragged, desperate sound in the quiet night. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. This wasn't just a quiet guy. This was something else entirely. "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and with a soft click, closed the door. He walked toward the house, a dark silhouette against the deeper black, even though it was pitch black and looked undeniably empty. I waited until he reached the porch before I finally pulled off, my tires spitting gravel. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app, my thumb shaking, and started heading back toward downtown, desperate to leave that place behind. A couple of blocks down, the city lights began to reappear, a comforting glow. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, needing to use the bathroom and grab a drink to calm my nerves. I parked at the side of the building, between two brightly lit pumps,
went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. The fluorescent lights of the gas station seemed too bright, too normal. And when I got back to my car, my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat. The same hoodie, the same vacant expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, a habit born of years driving at night. But somehow, inexplicably, he was in the back of the car. My breath hitched. I opened the driver's side door and slowly, cautiously stepped back in, keeping my eye on him through the rearview mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He just said, "Take me back." "I'm calling the cops," I said, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, so close I could hear his ragged breath against my neck, and whispered, "They're still in the house."
I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that, the absolute conviction in his voice, made me feel like he was trapped in some private nightmare, something the police couldn't simply fix. It wasn't just a weird passenger anymore. It was a desperate, perhaps delusional plea. I played along, my mind scrambling. "Whose house is that?" I asked. "My parents," he replied. I asked him if he lived there. "Not anymore," he said. And that made the hair stand up on my neck, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me screamed not to do it, to speed away, to get help, but I didn't know what else to do. It was a bizarre, terrifying loop. As we got closer, his breathing grew heavier, more frantic. He was rocking slightly in the back seat, a low, guttural moan escaping his lips. At one point he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." His words were filled with a raw, agonizing despair. When we pulled up to the house, it was still pitch black. Still no lights, no signs of anyone living there. Just the same empty shell. He got out without saying anything else, his movements almost sluggish, and then walked up to the front door. He didn't knock, didn't try the handle. He just stood there, still, facing the darkness, like a sentry for something unseen. I waited, perhaps 30 seconds, my eyes glued to him, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked this time. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely grip the wheel. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime, technically, as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, and honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police, because the man might have been sick in the head, needing help, or something far worse. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. The chilling implication of "they're still in the house" continues to haunt me.
I'm an 18-year-old girl, and I live alone in my apartment, with only my tiny 5-pound Morkie Gus for company. My building is about 8 miles outside the main part of town, nestled on the edge of a large, open field, often used for parking trailers and letting dogs run wild. Getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. Most places charge extra or simply refuse to come out this far. I never thought anything bad would happen with Uber Eats. You hear stories, of course, urban legends whispered online, but you never truly believe they'll happen to you. At least that's what I told myself. It was a Friday evening. The air outside was damp from a recent rain, clinging to everything. I was busy cleaning my apartment, a flurry of motion, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. He's long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends. I always try to have everything spotless before he arrives on Saturday morning. I'd been cleaning for about 2 hours, the scent of lemon cleaner filling the air, and it was well past 6 p.m. My stomach growled, reminding me that even cleanliness couldn't stave off hunger. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, having just scrubbed them all and sanitized the kitchen counter until it gleamed. So the easy solution was takeout. I ordered my usual, something comforting and familiar, and within minutes got the notification, "Your driver is on the way, driving a white Honda Fit Sport." Being a young girl living alone, I had my delivery instructions set to leave at door for contactless delivery. It was a small safety measure, a way to maintain a comfortable distance. I settled back into my living room, the soft glow of the TV flickering, waiting for the notification that my food had arrived. As soon as it popped up, I practically leapt from the couch, my stomach grumbling in anticipation. I opened my door, my hand already reaching for the promised bag of food, but it wasn't there. My heart sank. Maybe he left it at the wrong door, I thought, quickly scanning the other apartment doors on my floor. Nothing. A cold wave of annoyance washed over me. I stepped back inside, my phone in hand, ready to message the driver when I heard a soft, insistent knock at my door. My heart jumped. It wasn't the delivery driver. It was my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man who always kept an eye out for me. He was holding my food. "Hey, sorry," he began, his voice a little strained. "I picked up your food from your delivery driver because, well, he was looking through your windows, and I wasn't sure what he was doing." My blood ran cold. I took the food, my hands trembling slightly as I thanked him, a chilling question forming in my mind. What the hell just happened? I went back inside, the warmth of the food doing little to dispel the sudden chill that had settled in my apartment. I tried to push it out of my mind, ate my dinner, and tried to enjoy a movie, but the image of a strange man peering into my windows kept replaying. Later, as I started to get ready for bed, the unsettling feeling intensified. I took a shower, the hot water doing little to soothe my nerves. Then, as I went to turn off my TV, I methodically checked all my doors, pulling on the handles, making sure every lock was engaged. A routine that now felt vital. I lay down in bed, called my boyfriend for our nightly chat, and eventually the exhaustion of the day pulled me into a fitful sleep. I woke up a few times during the night. Each time, it was Gus, my little Morky, growling low and fiercely at the window or at the back door. Gus isn't a huge, scary dog. He's barely 5 pounds of fluff and fury, but it's still pretty terrifying when he growls at something unseen, catching you off guard in the dark. I'd calm him down, whispering reassurances, eventually getting him to settle back to sleep, but the unease lingered.
It wasn't even 15 minutes after I'd finally coaxed Gus back to sleep that I woke up again, this time to a loud, insistent banging on my bedroom window. My heart leaped into my throat. Gus went absolutely crazy, barking furiously, growling, and even whimpering, a sound I'd never heard from him before. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my bed, paralyzed by fear. I grabbed my bed sheets, pulling them over my head, leaving just enough space to peek out and see the window. The banging continued, sporadic but heavy, like a fist hitting the glass. I fumbled for my phone under the covers, my fingers clumsy with terror, and called the police. I whispered into the receiver, my voice thin and reedy. I explained to the operator that someone was in my backyard, trying to get in, and that my window didn't lock properly. It could easily be lifted. She told me to go to a different room, and that police would be at my apartment shortly. I scrambled out of bed, Gus whimpering at my heels, and ran to my kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find from the block. I stood there, trembling, clutching the cold steel, waiting to see blue and red lights, to hear the blessed sound of sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen, which overlooked a large field beside my building,
and I never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's white Honda Fit Sport. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment, parked in that very field, silhouetted against the dim glow of the distant city lights. The field was mostly empty at night, used for parking trailers and letting dogs play during the day. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. It clicked then. My mind put two and two together with horrifying clarity. He's in my backyard. The police finally arrived, their flashing lights painting the walls of my apartment in alternating hues of red and blue. I could barely speak. I was shaking and crying, barely coherent. I explained to one officer what had happened, while the other immediately went to check my backyard, where my bedroom window was. Another officer who arrived went to check the driver's car, which was still in the field. He returned, shaking his head. No one was in his car. The two officers came back and started talking to the officer I was speaking with, their voices low and serious. "There are footprints in her backyard," one of them said. "It had just rained the night before, so the ground was very muddy." I started panicking, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy? If he wasn't arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car, then where on earth had he gone? My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came outside to see what all the commotion was about. The officers explained what was happening. He then spoke about how he had picked up my food for me earlier that day, mentioning the driver's strange behavior. Mr. Henderson, bless his kind heart, invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer. A strange sense of exhaustion, of needing to face it alone in my own space, overcame me. When all the cops left and the silence of the night returned, I went back into my apartment, thinking it was all over. It took me a few hours to get comfortable enough to finally fall asleep, the knife still clutched under my pillow. But at 2 a.m., I woke up again, this time to a frantic banging on my front door and a distant shout, "Police, open up!" My heart plummeted to my stomach. No way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I scrambled up and went to my front door, terrified to open it. It was the woman officer I spoke to earlier. She explained they had stayed at my apartment, hidden, watching for that guy in case he showed back up. And he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, clearly trying to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested and I didn't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her, my voice still trembling, and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. The image of him, lurking in my backyard, then trying my front door, burned in my mind. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. Gus still growls at the window sometimes, even when there's nothing there. And I wonder if he senses a lingering presence, a shadow that never quite left.
This happened when I was really young. I'm talking second or third grade, maybe 7 or 8 years old. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, like trying to catch mist in your hands, but this memory, this specific sequence of events stands out with a stark, terrifying clarity for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and the sky had been weeping buckets since dawn, a relentless downpour that hammered against the classroom windows like angry fists. After picking me up from school, my parents, dressed in their fancy clothes that smelled of expensive perfume and distant places, left the house for some upscale event. I can't quite pinpoint it now. Was it a stuffy fundraiser, a formal dinner party, or something else entirely? Either way, they were supposed to come back home that very night, a comforting, unwavering certainty in my young mind. But while they were gone, the storm outside picked up like crazy. The wind began to howl, a mournful, hungry sound, and the rain turned into a blinding, torrential curtain, making it unsafe to drive long distances. Instead of fighting their way back home through the raging tempest, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses, who lived much closer to where the event was.
I remember them calling me on the heavy rotary house phone. It's black plastic, cool against my ear. Their voice is tinny and filled with repeated apologies for leaving me there by myself. I, in my boundless innocence and newfound sense of freedom, insisted that I wasn't even hungry and that I'd be perfectly fine. My mom, her voice tinged with an anxiety I couldn't then grasp, gave me a list of sacred tasks to complete before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on to ward off the encroaching darkness, make sure all the blinds were closed. Typical mundane stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to truly realize the gravity, the sheer importance of not leaving kids my age home alone during a ferocious storm. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the entire sprawling, silent place to myself. It meant unlimited candy from the hidden stash in the pantry, and even better, no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room back then, so I stayed downstairs in the living room, a vast, dimly lit space, watching TV on the plush, oversized couch. I told myself I'd meticulously follow all those instructions my mom had given me right before finally giving in to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway, lost in the glow of the screen. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash, inevitable and sudden, got to me. My eyelids grew heavy, the vibrant colors on the screen blurring, and I accidentally, deeply fell asleep, sinking into the soft cushions. No surprise there, I suppose. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, only that it was late enough for the TV to have clicked into sleep mode, its screen a blank black rectangle reflecting the ghostly shadows of the room. That meant at least 3 hours had passed, perhaps more. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up, a chilling dampness seeping into my bones. Nothing too out of the ordinary, I thought, rubbing my arms. But the difference, the sudden, profound drop, was significant enough for me to instantly make a subconscious connection, even at that young age. My teeth chattered lightly. I thought about just curling back up, burying myself deeper into the couch cushions and surrendering to sleep's comforting oblivion. But then, a flicker of guilt, a pang of responsibility pricked at me. I remembered the list my mom had given me, the solemn trust she had placed in my young hands. Even at that age, I knew with an intuitive certainty that she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she had trusted me to stay home alone in this monstrous storm. So, with a groan, I forced myself off the couch, and my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, went to check the windows and doors.
I padded around the downstairs, my small frame dwarfed by the looming shadows, diligently doing everything she had asked. I locked the front door, the heavy bolt sliding into place with a satisfying click. I secured the back door, its latch firm. I closed all the blinds, pulling the thin fabric down to block out the swirling, tumultuous night outside. I checked every window, running my hand along the cold glass, ensuring each latch was firmly pressed down. I even made sure the light in the living room was on, its soft glow battling the oppressive darkness. Everything was shut tight, sealed. This confused me a little, a small wrinkle in my understanding, because the house still felt undeniably, intensely colder than it should have, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep from the very walls. I even pressed my hand against a couple of the windows to make absolutely sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all perfectly sealed, impenetrable. I figured, with the simple logic of a child, that maybe the storm had knocked out the heater or some part of the heating system, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, a neat little bow on the mystery, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote any more precious energy to thinking about the elusive heat. So I headed upstairs to my room, dragging my tired body up each creaking step, ready to crawl into bed and forget about the whole uncomfortable experience. When I got to my room, the instant I stepped onto the carpeted floor, I finally realized just how truly bad the storm had gotten. Our living room, located deep within the center of the house, was insulated from the raw, untamed fury outside, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the full, terrifying might of the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom, however, had a big, old external window facing directly onto the backyard, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was alive, like a desperate, enraged creature trying with all its might to get in, each drop a percussive blow. And every minute or so, there was a blinding, instantaneous flash of lightning, illuminating my room in a ghostly, silver-white glow, followed almost immediately by a deafening, chest-rattling clash of thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, not truly, but I do distinctly remember being concerned that a tree, one of the massive old oaks outside, was going to crack and fall directly into the house, crushing everything. That's probably why I had so much trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been utterly dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there, rigid and wide-eyed in the darkness, trying desperately to coax myself back into sleep, I started picking up on these incredibly odd sounds. Every so often, there were these weird, irregular creaking sounds, like shifting wood or heavy footsteps on old floorboards. The thing is, the entire floor of my room, and indeed the entire upstairs, was thickly carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, my mind, seeking comfort in the familiar, tried to rationalize it, convincing myself it was just a tree swaying violently in the wind, its ancient branches groaning. But the sound didn't quite fit, didn't quite match the familiar symphony of a storm. Even then, young as I was, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms, the rolling thunder, the rhythmic patter, the howling wind. This, whatever it was, definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while, picking at the frayed edges of my composure. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm itself keeping me awake now. It was that stupid, anomalous sound, that unsettling creaking. I couldn't take it much longer. The suspense was unbearable. So, I sat up slowly, my small body rigid, and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for, my eyes wide and searching in the inky blackness. I listened, trying with every fiber of my being to drown out the overwhelming sounds of the storm and focus in on that insistent, horrifying creaking. Lightning flashed, a sudden blinding burst that illuminated the entire room for a split second, casting sharp, fleeting shadows. Everything looked normal, untouched, frozen in that ghostly light. But my eyes, almost magnetically, were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet, its old dark wood door standing ominously against the wall. The room went dark again, plunging back into suffocating blackness, and I sat there, perfectly still, barely breathing. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, a second, equally blinding burst, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, that terrifying sliver of time, I saw something that made me choke. A silent, internal gasp of pure horror.
The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. I was 100% sure of it, absolutely, undeniably certain. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I didn't even think. My mind a blank slate of primal terror. I just got out of bed as quietly as I possibly could, my bare feet barely brushing the carpet, and moving like a phantom, walked out of the room. That walk from the edge of my bed to the bedroom door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey, each step an eternity of agonizing suspense. I immediately went downstairs, my legs moving on their own accord, and without a second thought, hid under the dining room table, its heavy, dark wood offering a flimsy psychological shield. Then, and only then, in the suffocating darkness beneath the table, did the silent tears start, hot and stinging against my cold cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were miles away, too far to help me, completely oblivious to the terror unfolding. I'm not sure how long I stayed huddled under that table, curled into a tight ball, listening to the incessant drumming of the rain and the terrifying silence within the house. But at one point, through the muffled sounds, I heard it. Footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, every muscle in my body rigid, knowing with an awful certainty that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. They were heavy, irregular, almost stumbling, like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs, a clumsy, grotesque descent. The footsteps got closer, closer still. They were approaching the dining room, slow and deliberate, like they knew exactly where I was hiding, a predatory, intelligent movement. I can't tell you how scared I was. The terror was a cold, suffocating blanket. I really, truly thought I was going to die right there, alone in the dark. And then, from under the table, through the gap between the chair legs, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, only the lower half. Two bare feet walked into view, planting themselves firmly on the cold, tiled floor. Two nasty, wet, and muddy legs, caked in grime that was tinted a sickening yellowish brown. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked, covered in what appeared to be dried blood and dirt. There were cuts all over their legs, angry, jagged lacerations, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush or dragged themselves through rough terrain. They were also stumbling, swaying erratically, like they were struggling to even stand upright, their movements clumsy and unnerving. And just as I thought it couldn't possibly get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench, a heavy metallic wrench. It clattered against the floor, the sound impossible loud in the silence. And I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream, a desperate, animalistic cry that would surely betray my hiding spot. If that person bent down to pick up the wrench, they'd definitely see me. With wide, terrified eyes, unblinking, I watched as that person stood perfectly still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a terrifying standoff, a silent battle of wills, where any wrong move, any sound, any twitch could end my life.
Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of frozen terror, they finally continued walking, their stumbling footsteps receding, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened, every nerve ending screaming, as the chaotic shuffling footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity, searching, probing the darkness. And then, finally, the front door opened, a creaking groan, and then shut with a soft thud. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long, long time after that. Part of it was lingering fear, a paralyzing dread, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma, a deep, silent shock to my young system. I just remember being profoundly shaken and scared. I was at that ripe age where I understood, with dawning horror, how dangerous the situation was, how close I had come to something truly terrible, but not old enough to know how to rationally deal with it, how to process such a profound violation. The rest of the night was kind of a blur, hazy and indistinct. I eventually slowly crept out from under the table. I picked the wrench up off the floor, its cold metal heavy in my hand, not wanting my parents to find it the next morning and ask questions. After making absolutely sure the front door was locked, I slunked back upstairs, my body heavy with exhaustion and fear, crawled into bed, and finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, that I had been irresponsible. So I just kept the whole terrifying thing to myself, burying it deep inside. It wasn't until several years later, when I was much older, that I finally worked up the courage to tell them the story, painstakingly recalling every horrifying detail. And it actually took some convincing for them to truly believe me, to fully grasp the depth of the terror I had experienced.
Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful, awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it so far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, a small beacon against the imagined horrors of the dark, and I developed a profound fear of the dark that didn't go away for a very, very long time. I still have trouble explaining exactly what happened that night, who that person was, what they wanted, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night, every single one.
I was 15 when this happened, an only child living with my mom and dad in a house a little too big for just us three. It was a rainy Saturday night in May, one of the last weekends before summer. I have a lot of weird medical conditions that make my life difficult. I get frequent, crushing panic attacks that seize me without warning. I faint easily, my vision narrowing into a tunnel before the world fades to black, and I struggle breathing at times, a tightness in my chest that feels like an invisible hand squeezing my lungs. Also, I'm one of those peculiar people who needs complete and total silence to fall asleep. Not just quiet, but absolute, profound stillness. Even the gentle whir of a small fan is enough to keep me awake, my mind buzzing, unable to switch off. People always tell me they love the soothing sound of rain, that it helps them drift off to sleep, but it does the exact opposite for me. It's a relentless percussive assault on my senses, keeping my mind painfully alert. So, this particular Saturday, a heavy, unyielding downpour was relentlessly drumming on the roof, a maddening symphony that guaranteed a sleepless night. It was well past midnight when I finally faced the grim reality that sleep wasn't coming. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the hardwood, and paced my room, thinking about ways I could expend some restless energy. Eventually, an idea, a familiar comfort, solidified in my mind. I decided to go for a little walk in the rain. This wasn't the first time I had done that. Walking in the rain was actually something my parents encouraged me to do when I couldn't sleep. We live in a very safe residential area, a quiet suburb where neighbors knew each other, and there's a huge, sprawling public park that borders my house. So being out late wasn't considered dangerous at all. Plus, the park is very well lit, dotted with numerous lampposts that cast a soft, inviting glow across the winding paths, which is another one of the reasons I've always felt so comfortable walking there late at night. I slipped on a rain jacket, its waterproof fabric a comforting shield against the elements, quietly walked downstairs, my footsteps light on the carpeted stairs, and stepped outside without even bothering to bring an umbrella. I purposely didn't bring my phone because I knew myself well enough. The glowing screen, the endless distractions were only going to keep me awake longer, disrupting the fragile peace I sought. It was oddly peaceful outside, despite the steady downpour. I've always been one for nature, finding solace in its raw, untamed beauty. And seeing all the trees gently swaying in the wind, their branches heavy with glistening raindrops, the water screaming down their bark, was exactly what I wanted. The world felt cleansed, purified by the rain. After about 20 minutes of aimless wandering, the fresh, cool air washing over me, I started to feel myself finally getting tired, a welcome wave of exhaustion. This was a good sign. I turned around and started walking back towards my house, figuring I'd be able to fall asleep by the time I got back, my body finally yielding to the quiet fatigue. As I was cutting through the park, taking a shortcut across the dew-kissed grass, I glanced toward the main road that bordered the park and saw something strange. There was a long black object lying flat in the middle of the street, almost perfectly still. At first, my mind, seeking a mundane explanation, thought it was an oddly shaped garbage bag or something like that, perhaps blown there by the wind. But the more I looked at it, squinting through the rain-streaked darkness, the more I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach what it was. It was a person, just lying there, motionless in the middle of the street. They were face down, too, from the looks of it,
their body a dark, unmoving silhouette against the wet asphalt. A sick, cold feeling began bubbling up in my stomach, spreading through me like poison. The only thought, a terrifying, insistent whisper bouncing around my brain, was the likely possibility that they had been hit by a car and were severely injured, or worse, dead. There was no other logical, sane reason why someone would be lying motionless in the street, especially while it was raining as heavily as it was. As much as my gut, my primal instinct for self-preservation, screamed at me to just keep my head down and continue walking, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, I felt an undeniable moral imperative to do something. My parents had raised me a certain way, instilled a code of conduct. If I see a person in need, a person in distress, I have to help them. So, against every fiber of my instincts, against the rising tide of dread, I started approaching the person in the street, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the rain.
As I got closer, the rain continuing its relentless descent, I was able to make out what they were wearing. Dark pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the type of attire someone would wear during heavy rain, or any weather for that matter, if they were planning to lie down in the street. Judging by the clothing and the general shape, it was a man. But that's what I had already assumed, a chilling certainty. I'm not sure if it was the gravity of the situation, the encroaching reality of human suffering, or something else entirely, but as I was walking toward the street, my feet heavy with apprehension, I realized for the first time that night how intensely, profoundly cold I was. It was as if the rain, which had felt lukewarm a second ago, had suddenly transformed into ice-cold needles, piercing my skin. If that even makes any sense, the sudden extreme shift in temperature was disorienting, adding to the growing sense of unreality. As I was closing in on the road, my senses hyper-alert, every nerve ending screaming, a chilling screech, sharp and guttural, rang out from somewhere behind me. Instinct took over, raw and primitive, and I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my veins, a hot, bitter taste in my mouth. It sounded like a howl, long and drawn out, but subtly off, distorted like a wounded animal, a creature in unimaginable pain, its agony echoing through the night. That's the only way I can describe it, a sound that twisted my insides. A quick scan of the tree line that bordered the park revealed nothing, only the swaying, rain-soaked branches. The sound must have come from deeper in the park, meaning there was no immediate, imminent danger directly behind me. Still, the sheer strangeness of it all, the inexplicable nature of that sound had my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I had never heard anything like it before, a sound that seemed to defy explanation, and the lack of logical source was precisely what triggered that feeling of pure, unadulterated fear. But that feeling, that prickle of dread, was about to get 1,000 times worse. Because when I turned back around, my gaze snapping back to face the street, that person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright, their head tilted, their silhouette directly at me. In that horrifying moment, everything else started fading. The sounds of the rain, the distant hum of traffic, the chill in the air. It all dissolved into a muffled, indistinct blur. My vision narrowed, tunneling, the only thing truly in focus being that figure, that still, staring form. The only thing keeping me from passing out right there, collapsing onto the wet grass, was the muted, hypnotic sound of 1,000 raindrops pattering all around me, a white noise against the scream building in my throat. Before I could even react, before my paralyzed mind could formulate a single thought, that person with a horrifying, unnatural speed stood up and started sprinting towards me, their movements jerky and unnatural, a grotesque dance of malice. And then, as they closed the distance, I saw it. A demonic, impossibly wide smile stretched across their face, a grotesque rictus of pure malice. And what's worse, far, far worse, he was holding what looked unmistakably like a kitchen knife, its blade glinting dully in the weak streetlights reflecting the distorted park.
Up until that moment, I genuinely didn't know what it truly meant to fear for your life, to feel death's cold breath on your neck. But now I did. The haze of shock snapped, and primal instinct took over. I turned and ran as fast as I possibly could, my legs pumping in the opposite direction, away from the street, away from him. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell, his voice hoarse and raw, "I'll kill you!" at the top of his lungs, the words echoing, distorted through the rain, a chilling promise. The wet, slick grass made it impossible to run at full, unbridled speed, my feet slipping and sliding, but my one saving grace was that whoever was chasing me would have to contend with the same treacherous conditions. I didn't want to lead him to my house, to bring the horror home, so I instinctively ran towards the densest part of the trees, hoping I could lose him in the confusing labyrinth of the park. That's where the terrifying screech had just come from, I knew. A chilling thought, but I didn't have another choice. No other escape route presented itself. I didn't look once. I just ran, my lungs burning, my legs aching, like my very life depended on it. And considering how insanely cracked out, how utterly deranged that guy looked, I think my life actually did depend on it.
I ran towards the densest part of the park where the shadows were thickest, forming an almost impenetrable wall of foliage, hoping I'd be able to hide in there, to disappear into the protective embrace of the trees before he caught up to me. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, if he was still a silent, lurking presence behind me. But I didn't care. Part of me felt like if I stopped running, even for a second, the raw, paralyzing fear would finally catch up to me, engulfing me whole, and I'd pass out immediately. I finally made it deep into the woods, the trees towering above me like silent sentinels. And right when I was about to throw up from sheer exhaustion, my body screaming in protest, I ducked behind a massive ancient oak tree and tried to catch my breath, my chest heaving, my heart still a frantic drum. I must have waited at least 20 minutes, an eternity of terrified stillness, before finally, cautiously stepping out from behind that tree. I took the longest way home, a winding, circuitous route around the back side of the park and through this other section that spit me out a few streets away from my house, far from where the encounter had taken place. No one followed me. The shadows remained empty. I finally made it home, my body drenched and shivering uncontrollably, and collapsed onto my bed, utterly exhausted and, fundamentally, traumatized. I never got an answer for anything that happened that night. That unearthly howl, that chilling screech is honestly what confuses me the most. I have a hard time believing it was somehow related to the man that tried to attack me, that there was a direct connection, but it's just too coincidental for me to ignore. I think what happened is that guy heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and then, for whatever twisted reason, did whatever he did. As for his motivation, his dark purpose, I have no idea. There were just crazy, broken people out there in the world, monsters lurking in the rain. Maybe he was on drugs, some mind-altering substance that twisted his perception. I know it's not a real explanation, not a satisfying one, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though several years have gone by, it's hard not to think about this terrifying experience every so often, especially when the rain starts to fall and the shadows lengthen in the park.
My head is aching, but camping in the middle of nowhere helps clear it. I grew up in Northern California, learning to find those remote spots where you feel like the only person left on Earth. This story happened a few months ago. I'd just broken up with my ex and needed to be alone. I packed my truck and headed to a quiet riverside spot I knew. I arrived late afternoon, but as I turned onto the dirt path, my stomach sank. 2 trucks were already parked near the trailhead. Knowing others were there ruined the vibe. I sat, debating turning back, but convinced myself the river stretch was huge and they'd be far away. I hiked about 15 minutes downriver, and saw two guys fishing. They looked typical for the area, but seemed focused on something else. As I passed, one guy quickly covered something with his jacket, gave an awkward half smile, and called out about target shooting cans. I just nodded and kept walking. His rushed, forced casualness bothered me. Something didn't add up, but I pushed it aside, telling myself rural folks can be a little odd. I found a spot further down, tucked away behind thick trees. It started raining lightly, a gentle drizzle. I put on my rain jacket, letting the river and rain sounds drown everything out. Later I wandered to the river's edge to reflect, and that's when I noticed one of the guys from earlier across the water, alone. He spotted me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back. He yelled across, asking my name. Without thinking, I shouted back, "Anisha." He stood still and pulled something from his jacket. It looked like a disposable camera. Before I could process it, he held it up and took a picture of me from across the river. Then, without another word, he just turned and walked away. I was beyond creeped out. Taking my picture was beyond strange. I headed back to my campsite, deciding to stay put for the night. After sundown, I crawled into my tent trying to sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off, replaying my breakup. And then I started hearing something else. Faint, uneven sounds, like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. I tried to convince myself it was just rain or an animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps circling the campsite. My stomach dropped. I knew who it had to be. I'm no fool. I never go into the woods alone without protection. I grabbed my handgun from by my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the rain. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the trees. There he was, that creep, a few yards away, half hiding behind a tree. He had a blank expression, like he wasn't mentally present. But the scariest part wasn't his demeanor. He was holding a small axe in his left hand. For a second, I couldn't move. All I could think was how far I was from anyone, how no one would hear me scream. But I managed to raise the gun, leveling it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Leave now, or I'll kill you." His expression didn't change. My words seemed meaningless to him. After a few seconds, he mumbled something about his friend Ivan discouraging him from coming, and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait. I fired a shot straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled, clearly not expecting it. I leveled the gun again, more confident. I told him it was his last chance to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't safe yet. I told him to take his shoes off so he couldn't follow easily. I checked him for other weapons. Once I was sure he was unarmed, I made him go to my tent and empty my gear. I packed essentials quickly, never letting him out of sight. I jammed the axe into my backpack. I'd leave the tent, a small price for survival. Then I grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness. I told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept the light on him until he was out of sight, then turned and hiked back up the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part, stumbling through the pitch-black, rainy forest with a potential murderer behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my car. Both pickup trucks were still there. I threw everything in and sped out. When I got cell service, I called the police, describing my location. Months have passed. I don't know if anything came of it, but I'm not finding out. What still scares me most is his comment about taking care of Ivan. I don't want to think about what that means, but there's only so many explanations. I'm just glad I was armed. I could have easily lost my life that night. I just spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's pretty much an all-day drive back home. On my last day, my old friend Tom messaged me on Instagram asking when I was leaving. I told him today. He said he lived about an hour outside Austin, which was actually on my way home. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it sounded nice to catch up. So when he suggested I stop by, I figured, sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it estimated about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been close back in high school, but had completely lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, his house struck me as a little old-fashioned. It wasn't dilapidated, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it, and when he opened the door, I caught the distinct scent of old wood mixed with something rustic, almost like an isolated cabin in the deep woods. Tom, of course, was incredibly welcoming, pulling me into a big hug and ushering me inside. Some friendships just stay pure, no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house felt just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been there since the 70s, worn but sturdy, and every step I took on the hardwood floors let out a faint, low creak. It felt very Texas, I guess. It was kind of charming in a way, like stepping back in time, into a forgotten era. We settled into his living room, catching up on life, sipping whiskey. By this point, it was probably around 5 p.m. One drink turned into two, two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier, charged with a strange, thick atmosphere. Hours passed like minutes, honestly. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he popped the question I knew was coming. Hey man, you've got a long drive back. Why don't you just crash here for the night? I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road, not safely. Yeah, good idea, I slurred, asking if I could just take the couch we were on. He waved a hand dismissively. Nah, I've got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch. That was good enough for me. We ordered some Chinese food, which arrived quickly, and after a while he led me down a short, dimly lit hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I distinctly remember the air in the room was still, thick and unmoving, like the room hadn't been used in a very long time, its silence almost oppressive. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, utterly exhausted and completely drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was bone dry, my head was spinning, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes, and the room was swallowed by darkness, except for a thin sliver of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, standing sentinel-like against the wall, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, my drunken mind registered it as a long black trench coat on a coat rack, a mundane object. But as my eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, the shape of it felt profoundly wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost too broad, like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric draped over a hanger, and more like a sinister silhouette, a human-like form frozen in the shadows. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I'd just not noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself it was just a coat, nothing more, a trick of the light and my alcohol-addled brain.
But I couldn't help myself. My gaze was drawn back, compelled by an unseen force. I peeked again. It was still there, a silent, unmoving sentinel. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep, shuddering breath, and forced myself to sleep, willing the image away. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up again. This time, it wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was a sound, a slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old, stressed wooden floor.
My eyes shot open, instantly alert. The room was dimly lit now, the first faint hint of dawn creeping through the blinds, painting the shadows in hues of gray. I slowly turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped through the floor. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun, a dizzying jolt. My body was buzzing with a sickening mix of raw fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thumping violently against my ribs, an erratic rhythm of pure panic. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door, innocent in the nascent light. I threw the covers off, practically leaping out of bed, and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring loudly, completely unaware of the silent storm of panic raging through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering he was completely out from all that alcohol. He finally woke up, groaning, very confused, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "The coat," I said, breathlessly, my voice barely a whisper. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, his eyes still blurry with sleep and confusion. "What coat?" he mumbled. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person almost." Tom slowly sat up, looking more awake now, his eyes beginning to focus. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said, his voice flat. I stared at him, my mind reeling, waiting for him to break character, to say that he was messing with me, that this was some kind of cruel joke. But his expression stayed serious, devoid of any humor. "Come look," I insisted, my voice tight with desperation. He sighed, weary exhalation, but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot, my hand trembling slightly. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head, a gesture of deep bewilderment. He asked me if I wasn't just dreaming, if it was just a nightmare. "But I know what I saw. I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone." We stood in the room for a few moments, the silence pressing in on us, both of us feeling the same eerie, unsettling atmosphere. Tom finally exhaled, a long, slow breath, and shook his head, a reluctant agreement. He agreed we should check the house, just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every dark corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, no trace of what I had seen. Nothing that could logically explain what I had witnessed. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I had been in some kind of half-dream state, a drunken hallucination, seeing things that weren't truly there. I wanted to believe that. Really, I desperately didn't want to think about the alternative, about a sinister presence in his home. As soon as the sun was fully up, casting its bright, undeniable light, I grabbed my stuff, mumbled a quick goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that, the unsettling feeling clinging to me. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that horrifying moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner, the way it was just inexplicably gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, a dark joke, but to this day, he's never admitted to anything, and his expression seemed genuine, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house, silently watching me sleep from the shadows, and they decided to leave, a phantom departure, before the morning came, before the light exposed their dark secret. The uncertainty still haunts me.
I was 18 years old when this happened. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, Anna. This story takes place in Sweden during a road trip. My parents, Anna, and I were going on a domestic trip, and we had an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one. The day came, and we arrived in the city where the theme park was located. We planned to visit it the next day, so we needed a place to sleep. Since we had brought tents in our car, my dad searched online for a nearby campsite.
He found one that seemed good and close by, so he called it. Unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament and the campsite was fully booked. Since we hadn't reserved a spot in advance, there was no space left for us. My dad called around, but we couldn't find any reasonably priced campsites near the theme park. Our only option was to find a camping spot in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was a good place to stay. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to sleep in a small, lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by dense, ancient forest, and about a 10-minute walk away was a secluded beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something, an unspoken intuition, told me it would be better, safer, to camp in the parking lot. As we got out of the car to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked like it was in bad condition, rusted and dented, and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, the sun dipping below the tree line, so there were no more people at the beach or hiking in the woods. However, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents set up our tents. They were sleeping in one tent while Anna and I shared the other, with both tents placed close together for comfort and safety. After struggling to build them, battling with poles and stakes, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, stringing up a small battery-powered lantern, watched YouTube on my phone, and ate snacks, filling the air with the soft glow and quiet chatter. By this time, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep at a decent hour so we wouldn't be too tired the next day for the theme park. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. At this point, my parents were already asleep in their tent, their soft snores a comforting sound. Anna and I was still scrolling through TikTok, the faint glow of our screens illuminating our faces, when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. It sounded distinct, sharp, like a shovel being thrown onto the gravel. We both jumped in fear, our hearts leaping into our throats, and whispered to each other, "What could that be?" Too scared to peek out of the tiny tent window, we chose to stay silent and listen, every nerve ending screaming. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. We then heard what I assumed was a shovel being thrown into the car's trunk, followed by the definitive slam of the trunk lid. We sat in suffocating silence, our hearts pounding like drums. Then we heard the car engine roar to life, tires spitting gravel, and it sped off as if someone were trying to get away quickly, desperately. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands, texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were staying, giving him our precise location, a lifeline. He replied almost immediately, his message sending a fresh wave of dread through me, warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, with organized criminals often engaging in illegal activities there. We had no idea about this before. When I read my friend's message, I felt cold and deeply unsettled. About 10 minutes passed in an agonizing silence after the car sped away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little, our breaths less ragged, when we out of nowhere heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from a man coming from the woods. We were absolutely horrified, paralyzed by the sound, a primal shriek of pure agony. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard a loud scream.
When she didn't respond, I called her phone to wake her up. She finally answered, groggy with sleep, and said neither she nor my dad heard anything. She reassured me that it was probably nothing serious, a fox or an owl, but at that moment, in the dead of the night, I couldn't think of any normal, rational reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled onto the blankets, huddling together, terrified, not knowing what was happening outside our thin tent walls. Every minute felt like an hour, the hands of the clock dragging by. Even though it was well past midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Suddenly, everything became eerily silent. The crickets stopped chirping, the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily, carefully, deliberately. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear, our eyes wide with unspoken terror. I put my phone down so that its light wouldn't accidentally illuminate the tent, betraying our presence.
My heart was racing, a frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest, and I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at this hour. The footsteps moved around our tent first, a slow, methodical circuit, then toward my parents' tent, then circled around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be looking at our tents for a moment, a prolonged, unsettling pause. There was complete silence again. Then I heard the same car from earlier returning, its engine roaring, tires spitting gravel. Its headlights suddenly lit up our tents, a blinding, terrifying beam, and Anna and I quickly laid down, pressing ourselves against the ground to avoid being seen, to disappear into the shadows. I gathered the courage to peek through the small tent window, a tiny slit of desperate vision. I saw the car door slam shut before it sped off again, tires screeching, disappearing into the darkness. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of relief when the person left. From my vantage point, I could see the road they had driven down. 5 minutes later, I saw another car approaching fast. It was a police car, its siren silent, lights flashing, racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Anna and I were still incredibly shaken, so we decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer, its metal frame a stronger shield than the tent. I stayed awake until around 5 a.m., keeping watch over the forest, my eyes scanning the shadows, while Anna, exhausted, eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, when the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky, we went back to our tent and, out of sheer exhaustion, finally fell asleep. We woke up around 9 a.m., completely drained, our bodies aching. I told my mom everything that happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps. But when the person was near their tent, she had also heard heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies during a scary phone call. She had been terrified too, paralyzed by fear. However, my dad had slept through the whole thing, oblivious, so we had to tell him the story from the beginning. Without hesitation, we immediately packed our things, stuffing the tents quickly into the car, eager to leave as soon as possible. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. Despite the terrifying night, we had a good time at the theme park later that day, a surreal escape. However, that evening, haunted by the memories, I decided to research the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop with a sickening lurch. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death due to gang-related debts. Even more disturbingly, 2 men had gone missing from that exact beach and had never been found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents was a dangerous individual, checking to see if there were any witnesses? What if we had been in serious, life-threatening danger without even fully realizing it until it was almost too late? Even now, I still think about that night. Who made that horrifying scream, a sound that chills me to my core? And why was someone using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police, what exactly were they chasing? I guess I'll never know. The questions linger, forever unanswered, a chilling echo in my mind.
This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 years old is around the age where a lot of my childhood memories start to become more clear, like sunlight breaking through fog. I have one sibling, my older brother Keith. Keith is 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8 when I was 6. We had a strict bedtime, 8:30 p.m. If I didn't abide by it, or if our dad caught either of us up past our bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids, his rules firm and unyielding. Honestly, I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake.
Keith and I shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house, a sprawling space with 2 beds. My parents' room was on the first floor of the house, a floor below us. I was confused why Keith was waking me up until he told me in a hushed whisper to be quiet and listen. And I did listen, and I heard exactly what he was talking about. It was our mom's voice, soft and low, calling for us from downstairs. But it wasn't her usual clear maternal tone. It was a very quiet, almost eerie whisper-type voice, like a secret being shared with the darkness. I was about to get up, eager to go answer our mom, but my brother, his eyes wide and serious in the dim light, told me not to. He said, his voice barely audible, that he didn't think it was Mom. I told him to stop trying to scare me. I remember being so mad at him, annoyed by his antics, but he just urged me closer. He told me to go closer to the door and listen. So I got up, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and went towards the bedroom door. Right outside of our bedroom door was a small, short hall that led to the bathroom and another bedroom that our grandma would sleep in whenever she'd stay over. Directly to the right, when you left our bedroom, was the stairway downstairs, which also had a door at the top. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the bedroom door, and I heard the voice clearer now. It distinctly said, in what sounded like our mom's voice, calling our names, softly, insistently. Keith? Mikey? I whispered to Keith, "That's Mom." And he just shook his head, his face pale in the faint moonlight. "No, it's not," he insisted, his voice barely a breath. Somehow, as a 6-year-old, and as the typically more timid little brother, I found myself being the one confident enough to slowly open our bedroom door. Then, propelled by a morbid curiosity mixed with growing unease, I crept towards the stairway door and listened through it. But now, the voice had stopped. A sudden chilling silence filled the air, broken only by the distant murmur of the house. I whispered to Keith that Mom must have walked away. And again, he just reiterated, "That's not Mom." I kept telling him to shut up, that he was scaring me, but a cold dread was beginning to creep into my own heart. I unlocked the stairway door, the click sounding impossibly loud in the stillness, and slowly, painstakingly, pulled it open, inch by agonizing inch, trying to avoid making any noise, any betraying creak. And when the door was open just enough for me to peek through the opening, at the very bottom of the stairs, it was clear as day, the silhouette of a person, a woman. But right away, with an undeniable, chilling certainty, I knew it was not our mom. Her posture, her stillness was all wrong. Whoever it was, she saw me, because she said, her voice still a quiet whisper, but now directed clearly at me, "Hi, sweetie. Come down." Immediately, my blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut and locked it, the loud thud echoing through the quiet house. Then I stumbled back into our bedroom and locked that door as well. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging, and I started to cry, silent sobs shaking my small frame. Keith, his face equally terrified now, kept repeating, "I told you, I told you." We both looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between us. We needed to wake our parents. We both agreed to start screaming as loud as we possibly could to wake them up. So on 3, we started stomping on the floor and screaming as loud as we possibly could, our young voices piercing the stillness of the night. It didn't take long for our parents to barge up the stairs, their heavy footsteps thundering, pounding on the locked door of our bedroom. At first, our dad was furious about the door being locked, his voice sharp with annoyance.
But as soon as we let them in, they saw that I'd been crying, my face streaked with tears, and that both of us were genuinely disturbed, shaking with fear about something profound. They listened intently to our frantic, breathless account. My mom was particularly concerned after we finished, her face pale, telling us she was absolutely not at the bottom of the stairs, and she was certainly not calling our names. She asked what the woman looked like, trying to gather details, but all we could say was that we couldn't tell, only that it wasn't her. Meanwhile, I remember our dad, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a tense urgency, running downstairs to, I guess, look around for the woman, to confront the unseen intruder. After a bit, our mom kissed us goodnight again, her touch a little more lingering, and I'm pretty sure she told us to lock the doors, which was a first. I was too young to fully catch on, but it seemed as if our parents knew exactly who it could have been, a dark, unspoken history hinted at in their worried glances. Keith and I looked out the window when we heard the doorbell ring after a while, its chime muffled, and we saw a police car outside, its blue lights flashing silently. We wanted to go downstairs, to peek, to understand, but we stayed put, glued to the window. I remember we begged our parents to tell us who it was and what happened, but our parents would always deflect, always say they didn't know, their faces carefully neutral. They would also say they're proud of us for not going downstairs, for our bravery. Personally, I think they did know who it was, and to save my brother and I from any kind of further trauma or fear, they just never told us. Because the last time I saw my parents for dinner, just a few weeks ago, I asked them about it again, trying to get to the bottom of the decades-old mystery, and they still shrugged it off as some random intruder, but that never ever explained how that woman knew our names. It's a chilling detail that still keeps me up at night.
This happened when I was 16. I was still in high school, without a car yet, so I was at the mercy of my parents driving me around or just walking if my destination was close. It was a weekend, and my friend Haley was having some of our friends over since her parents weren't home. My mom drove me to her house. Haley lived close, about a 3-minute drive and a 20-minute walk. My mom was single at the time, and she also liked to go out, so she told me that if she's out late, I should just walk or get a ride home, which usually meant she was going on a date. A few of our girlfriends were at Haley's house, Tina, Courtney, and Belle. The 5 of us hung out in her backyard for a few hours, the evening air warm and filled with laughter, until some boys from our school unexpectedly showed up. By unexpectedly, I mean Haley didn't tell me she was inviting them, and I was instantly annoyed. The reason was one of the boys who showed up was a boy I had some annoying history with and really didn't want to see. Haley thought she was being cute and sneaky by inviting him there against my knowledge because for some reason she wanted him and I to work things out. It was just an awkward mess. There were 4 boys and 5 girls, including me, so eventually I just decided I wasn't really feeling it. After a while, I left. I'm sure after I left, some of the others started to leave shortly after because it was already getting late, but I just didn't want to be around those boys. I made sure to let Haley know how pissed off I was over text as I was walking home. She kept texting back, "OMG, come back," and apologizing. I forgave her, but I still just wanted to go home, to the comfort of my own space. I walked for about 5 minutes, the streetlights casting long shadows, until I slowed down. I thought I heard footsteps behind me. When I purposefully slowed my pace further, I confirmed it. I heard footsteps that weren't mine. I turned around, my heart giving a little jump, and there was a middle-aged man with a hood pulled up over his head and his hands buried deep in his hoodie pocket. He was smiling, a wide, unsettling grin, looking directly at me and said, "How you doing?"
I responded, "Hi," my voice a little tight, and just turned and kept walking. We were in the suburbs. People walk around. It's not unheard of, even if it was getting late. 5 more minutes passed as I walked, the sound of his footsteps a rhythmic counterpoint to my own. Every time I'd glance back, that man would still be behind me, more or less the same distance away, maybe a little closer each time I looked. It was not a straight path home. I'd have to make multiple turns onto intersecting roads to get to my house, and with each turn I made, he was still there, a persistent, unyielding shadow. I was texting my friends about it, my fingers flying frantically across the screen, trying to convey the growing unease. And then, the man from behind me spoke again, his voice cutting through the quiet night. "Isn't it such a nice night? Love this weather." I replied, "Yeah." My voice clipped, and that was it. I started walking just a bit faster, but not enough to draw suspicion, not enough to look like I was running away. The man spoke again, and every time he opened his mouth, a part of me died a little more inside, consumed by a growing dread. Why was he talking to me? Why was he following me? He asked, "Are you from the neighborhood?" I replied, "No," making my answer short and firm, hoping to discourage him. The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. I started frantically asking all my friends for help, begging them to send one of the guys to come pick me up. Ironically, the boy who I was trying to avoid earlier was now on his way to come get me. I'll just nickname him Brandon.
The man behind me then said something that changed everything, freezing the blood in my veins. He said, his voice dropping slightly, "I'm not gonna hurt you. You live by the elementary school, right?" I turned around abruptly, my face draining of color, and he stopped in his tracks. He was still smiling, but now his smile seemed more disingenuous, more sinister, a predatory grin. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and started to run, pure terror propelling my legs. I heard the man running behind me, his footsteps gaining, catching up to me. At that point, it was my life on the line, so I started screaming bloody murder, my voice raw and desperate, screaming, help me," for everyone in their houses to wake up. And he, the man, dropped his nice guy facade and snarled, "Shut up, you little bitch!" My screams definitely scared him off because he obviously didn't want a bunch of witnesses about to come out of their houses. He quickly turned and ran away, disappearing into the darkness. I saw some lights in the houses around me turn on. One couple came out of their house, their faces bewildered, and I explained, breathless, I almost got kidnapped. I stayed there, shaking, in front of their house until Brandon arrived to pick me up. He drove me home. It was only like a 1-minute drive after that. My mom wasn't home. She was still out and wasn't answering my texts. I didn't want to be alone, not after that, so I invited Brandon in to stay the night. I know he was the happiest camper alive, getting to stay over. But it didn't end there. We were up late, just talking and reminiscing about old times, tried to process what had happened, when we both heard footsteps circling the house. My room in that house was upstairs, facing the backyard. We then heard the gate to the backyard opening, a soft, metallic click. My mom would never enter through the backyard, so something was definitely off. I held back from yelling out, "Mom," and instead Brandon and I just looked out the window, watching, our hearts pounding. We didn't hear any more sounds. We were expecting to see someone walking around the yard, but instead we both heard a man's voice say, low and chilling, "I see you up there." I let out a very audible gasp and instinctively stepped away from the window, pulling Brandon with me. Brandon yelled out something along the lines of, "We're calling the cops, you freak!" And that's exactly what we did. The chilling fact that this man knew where I lived, he probably knew who I was. What if he knew I was going to Haley's house? Brandon did a lot of the talking on the phone with 911, his voice surprisingly steady. Looking back, I know he tried really hard to be the man in the situation, to be strong for me, and I appreciated that more than words could say. I was honestly so happy he came inside. The cops showed up quickly, their presence just made me feel safer, a wave of relief washing over me. Even just giving them a description of this man made me feel better, like at least something was being done. My mom got home soon after, completely freaked out as well. They kept a police car parked on the block for a few hours as a deterrent, its presence a silent guardian. Thankfully, from there on, I didn't do any walking at night. I was even scared to go into our backyard after that. My mom had our uncle come over and installed an entire security camera system. He made no effort in hiding them. They were on full display, big and obvious, designed to deter that creepy man and any other creep from coming to that house. I'm glad to say that the story ended there because this incident also prompted my mom to sell that house about a year later, just because she hated seeing me living in constant fear within those walls.
We never found out who that man was, a chilling mystery that remains unsolved.